Hello, our topic is Gemini. The zodiac sign Gemini. Does it really work? Does astrology really work? And what I'm going to suggest here is that Gemini does work. The zodiac sign Gemini gives curiosity and a childlike inquisitiveness. You can think of Gemini as an image would be the willingness to break a clock in order to figure out how it works. You can imagine a kid looking at this clock and it's going tick, 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 and the kid is wondering, gee, what makes this thing tick? And you get this instinct where you think, let me pull it apart and see what's in there. Excuse me. So that's what the Gemini does. It pulls it apart. It's just curious. What's making this thing tick? It looks around the world and says, well, why is the sky blue? How does the rose know how to bloom in the spring? Good questions. How does a rose know how to bloom in the spring? Why is, Uncle Tom so tall? Good question. We might have to study genetics to figure this out. So you just look around the world and you go, wow, this is curious. Wow, this is fun. Wow, this is intriguing. That's the Gemini relationship to the world. So I'm suggesting that rather than thinking of a zodiac sign as a list of characteristics, that Gemini talks a lot, Gemini does this, Gemini does that, or like an archetypal image, we can just think of it as a way of relating to the world. We all have Gemini. We're all curious. But what I'm suggesting is if somebody has lots of Gemini, then this way of relating to the world dominates. And there are 12 signs, 12 ways of relating to the world, and this way would be strong. What would be lots of Gemini? Well, I have a chart here in the background in the Series 2.0 software of a famous person by the name of Chris Beard. We'll look at him later. Excuse me. But this would be lots of Gemini. Sun and Moon in Gemini. Only less than 1 out of 100 people will have, excuse me, Sun and Moon in Gemini. And the ruler of, we call the ruler of Gemini is Mercury. It's also in Gemini. Venus and Mars, Sun, Moon, all 5 inner planets are in Gemini. That's a lot of Gemini. It doesn't have Gemini rising, but this is a lot of Gemini. So, what we're going to do is we're going to look at charts of people with lots of Gemini and see if this is really true. Now, another thought about Gemini is, in this curiosity, just looking at the world, when you look at the world, there's 2 things that happen. Some things are repeatable. Every spring, the roses bloom, or almost every spring. Some things are pretty regular. Every winter, it gets colder. So, in a given location. So, some things are predictable, and some things are random. When you drop a coin, you don't know what it will be. If you're playing cards, you get certain cards. Maybe if science was good enough, it would be able to tell us why you get certain cards. But for right now, we consider it to be random. We don't know what cards you're going to get. That's part of what makes some games a lot of fun. So there's randomness and there's predictability. Now, that's obvious. We don't think about that consciously, and Gemini doesn't think about it consciously. But the point I want to make is that Gemini is intrigued by both. That worked again. Oh, that's predictable. Oh, wow. We don't have a way of predicting this. It's intrigued and fascinated by both the predictable and the random aspects. It finds the whole world fascinating and interesting. So there is this childlike sense of inquisitiveness and curiosity. Now, another thing that's prominent with Gemini, my last point on this opening slide, that when a person's under a lot of pressure and stress, it threatens to destroy the enjoyment of the experience. So Gemini is naturally curious, naturally begins to learn, but say it's in a school experience where there's a lot of pressure to pass the test, and the emphasis is on passing the test. The emphasis is on performance. Suppose the child has a fascination with music and starts playing piano and starts taking lessons, and it's lots of fun, and the piano teacher shows him how you make chords and how you play in different keys, and the child is, even as an adult, the adult says, oh, this is great. That's why this song is sad. It's a minor key. I get it. And so, and this other sound is a major key. And gee, I add this note, and it gives this feeling. It's quite fascinating. It's quite interesting. So, this is what Gemini is all about. But then if they go into competitions and the pressure to perform and pressure to be perfect can impact. It can get to the point of even destroying the enjoyment of the experience. So Gemini wants to play well. It wants to understand how things work. It takes delight in making progress and understanding and experiencing everything. But it wants to just keep jumping another hurdle. And the thrill is not so much in being better or being a master as much as just getting it and then moving on to the next step. This is really important, and we're going to see how this plays out in the lives of people. So here in this slide, I go over some of the things I just mentioned. Paragraph number 2, rote learning and memorization can threaten to kill the spirit of Gemini. Possibly even more threatening is the pressure to perform well after developing a talent and skill. So I give this example of the piano that I just gave. Okay. So a focus on competition rather than the beauty and wonder of the music can turn the child who loved to play piano into an adult pianist who experiences great anxiety and concern before a recital. Excuse me. We're going to see that one of the strong Gemini people is an actor who experiences stage fright. Why would... here, I talk about it in the second paragraph. Richard Monette, I guess. I'll pronounce it Monette. I don't know how the proper pronunciation is. He experiences stage fright. Would that have anything to do with Gemini? Well, it could, even though we don't think of Gemini as stage fright. One probable reason for the stage fright is that at a deep unconscious level, also at a conscious level, this instinctive visceral level, he realizes that the judgments of the critics, the focus on the acting flaws by many attendees contradicts the primary reason to be acting. So all this emphasis on, was that a good performance? Was that good? Did this make money at the box office? Blah, blah, blah. That's not the main point. Those things have to happen, but the main point should be the fascination of the performance, the ideas, the insights, the lights, the camera, the whole intricacy and beauty and magic of the performance. That's what Gemini loves. So Gemini was designed to explore and experience, not to make judgments and evaluation of how well the goal was reached. So Gemini is just not up to this requirement. It's not built to be focused on judgment and evaluation. Primary reason for theater is the story, the effect, the magic of the experience, and of course the actor strives for excellence. But some flaws, here's the point, here's a way of looking at it. Some flaws in a cathedral do not destroy the wonder and fascination of the cathedral. So if you're in Europe and you go to one or wherever and you see you're inside an amazing cathedral with all the detailed work that's done, just amazing, curious, how does all this happen? And you see, a chip in one of the stones or something. You don't go, oh, gee, the cathedral's terrible because of that one chip in a stone or problem with one of the stained glass windows. It's still wonderful. It'd probably be even more wonderful if you fix that, but Gemini is not going to focus on that flaw. It's going to focus on the wonder of what's going on. Okay, now, so what's the goal of Gemini? Gemini needs to find ways to explore, investigate, and enjoy life right through adulthood, of course, throughout the whole life. So Gemini must find things that are interesting and avoid feeling overly pressured by the need to succeed economically or for any other reason. Gemini has to learn how to live with the frustrations and challenges of life by not focusing too much attention on them and finding time to enjoy learning, discovering, and sharing ideas with others. They have to carve a path that makes that possible. So, bottom line, central drive of Gemini is curiosity. Gemini needs a variety of experiences or many layers of discovery of a single subject. So, this is a little bit different from what's sometimes said about Gemini. Sometimes people say Gemini has to, it's like a butterfly, has to jump from one idea to another. Very often that's true, but sometimes Gemini will stay in one area and keep discovering new things. They can keep playing piano. There's almost an infinite number of kinds of music to discover and styles of music. They need to keep exploring, comparing and contrasting observations, and finding new things. one way or another. An easy and convenient way to do that is just to jump from one area to another, but you can find infinite variety even within a fairly specialized area as well. So Gemini is intrigued and delighted by the curious things it encounters. The key point of Gemini is not to master the subject, but rather to explore it and enjoy it. And often, through that curiosity, they do become talented and develop skill, because they're exploring and involved because they love it. It's not work to them. So now the Gemini, last point I make in this slide, Gemini, you know, there's a person with many planets in Gemini, is not likely to be able to articulate this consciously. That's critical, because if you ask Gemini if this is true, they might think about it, and may or may not realize it, but I think the zodiac signs work at an instinctive level. It's so ingrained in the person, they may not even realize that this is what's going on. It's built in. It's like a cosmic genetic code. It's just built into the way we relate to the world. So we can think of each zodiac sign as relating to some existential fact, some fact of life. And the fact is, we're in a world that's interesting and curious. Maybe you hear the birds chirping outside my window right now. We're very curious. All these birds. Why are there all these birds? Why are they chirping every morning? You know, the world is fascinating, full of diversity and complexity, and Gemini delights in both the random as well as the ordered parts of life. There are endless curious things in the world. Okay, so I already discussed this. The zodiac signs describe an attitude and approach to the world. And the second paragraph, very important point, zodiac signs are not very good at describing behavior. They're not very good at describing anything tangible. Some astrologers may not agree with that, but that's what the research shows. I use a form of astrology called vibrational astrology, and these vibrational patterns, these intricate aspect patterns, I believe do tell us more about the behavior and what a person does, but zodiac signs don't do that very well. And this is another video in a series of videos on zodiac signs using extreme case sampling. So what we have here is we have 9 charts, 9 extreme Gemini people who have the AA accuracy from birth certificate or birth record, and they scored 23 or higher. And you can stop at any point. I just stopped at 23 because that gave me a good number of charts. I don't want 30 or 40 charts because I don't have enough time and energy to study 30 or 40 charts. So you do research that's practical. I'm willing to study the top 9. And the idea is that these top 9 people must exhibit some clear Gemini qualities, or my theory of Gemini doesn't work. They have to. That's the whole idea of extreme case sampling. And the technical details I gave: 5 points, the Sun, Moon, Ascendant, and Ruler of the Ascendant. In Gemini, 3 for Mercury, Venus, and Mars, 2 points for Jupiter and Saturn, 1 point for Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. It really doesn't matter how you do your points. You take somebody like Chris Beard, who's got all 5 inner planets in Gemini. It doesn't matter how many points I give Gemini. He's Mr. Gemini. He must have Gemini qualities. And we'll see how they do. Now, among these 9 people, we have 2 athletes. Well, we don't think of Gemini especially as athletic. One is a baseball player, one is a tennis player. So that's interesting, but as I said, I don't think that signs describe behavior very well. One's a murderer. So that's interesting. We don't think of Gemini as that. But it doesn't surprise me because, again, I don't think signs describe behavior consistently. We do have a journalist. That fits. We have an actor, an astrologer, etc. Okay. So this extreme case sampling is very, very revealing. So it confirms that we cannot predict behavior consistently. Right? We just have to give up that idea. We cannot consistently get behavior just from the signs alone. And it's even using aspects, it's difficult to see why this person would be a murderer and so on. Or these people are athletes using the typical rules in astrology. but especially signs are not very good at clearly indicating behavior. So again, zodiac signs tell us about the style and attitude of a person, but not the specific behavior. Okay, so here they are. Here's our extreme people. Chris Beard. He's a comedy writer, producer, director. Very Gemini activity. 3 people I put in bold at the top. So out of the 9 people who score 23 or higher that I was able to find a decent amount of biographical information about, 3 of them fit the Gemini lifestyle. We have the comedy writer, producer, and director Chris Beard. We have a journalist, social critic, and author Vance Packard. We have a director of films and documentaries. Documentaries, very Gemini. Curious about a lot of different things, exploring a lot of different things. Journalism, very Gemini. So these 3 people I listed first because they fit the behavior. The other 6, not as obviously. One is the Richard Monette, the actor. The astrologer, Ina Stanley, also a friend of mine. Jeff Bagwell, that's the baseball player. Here's the murderer and rapist, Patrice Allegre. Remember, he's French, and Patrice is also a male name for those of you Americans, so this is a male, Patrice Allegre. Steffi Graf, the great tennis player, and a politician, John Allen Stewart. So, the name of the game is all 9 of these people must exhibit strong Gemini qualities. Is it true? Well, for 3 of them, it's a no-brainer. We hardly even have to do anything because their whole life is Gemini. Chris Beard, Vance Packard, and Bert Honstra, their whole professional life centers around Gemini activities. A comedy writer? How Gemini is that? As the saying goes, rhetorical question, yes. Producer, director, journalism, social critic, looking at lots of different issues. So all 3 of these people are involved in clear Gemini lifestyles. So that we don't have to look very far. But how? We don't have to look very far to make sense of it. But how are these 6 people Gemini? What is Gemini about Steffi Graf? What is Gemini about Patrice Allegre? Let's explore it. Because, again, if we can't make sense of it, we have to doubt our ideas of Gemini. So that's just a statement. All 9 people must exhibit the Gemini qualities. Okay, Chris Beard, well, he's a no-brainer. I'll read something from Wikipedia anyway, but he clearly has the Gemini qualities. When you read about his life, it becomes even more obvious. I'll read this quote from Wikipedia real quickly. After working on radio and serving 2 years in the Australian Army, at 23 he became a host of the children's television series Small Time. Children's television series, very Gemini, with all the different ideas and cleverness of kids. So his appearances in this show and his writing for other Australian comedy shows was recognized by visiting Canadian and American producers. Beard has received an Emmy Award, a Golden Globe Award, a Writers Guild of America Award. Wow. So he's extremely successful in a Gemini area. So I said that signs don't consistently predict behavior, but probably a little more often than random. You can't get very good consistency, but sometimes it does stand out. So this is about as Gemini as you can get. I'm not sure what the second house emphasis is. So this is all in the second house, or close to being the second house. That's not obvious, but at least the Gemini is obvious. And our topic right now is the zodiac signs. So there's this chart. I've already shown it to you here in the background. So there it is, and I mentioned that this is Placidus houses, and most of the planets are in the second house. Now, John Allen Stewart, politician. Now, he's a politician, but he did live a varied life and an interesting life. He was a Scottish politician. So in Scotland, he attended St. Andrews University, and then he went to the USA and graduated from Harvard. He was a lecturer at St. Andrews, went into politics. So he was an academic, having gone to Harvard. Not all politicians are that academic. He went to the U.S., came back, so there's some variety and richness to his experiences. Maybe not as pronounced as we would like, but looking at his chart, he has Sun and Ascendant in Gemini, also Saturn, Uranus, and Gemini. Notice that Saturn is within 2 degrees of the Ascendant, so that's his chart. And he does seem to have a reasonably strong Gemini qualities in his life, not as conspicuously as we might hope for, but reasonably so. And if we read about him, we find out that one of the things he was famous for is he waved a pickaxe at people who were demonstrating for environmental reasons against the building of a road that he supported. And this led to his resignation. So he had this road built that he supported. People said it was going through some sensitive lands, and they were protesting. And so the politician, Alan Stewart, he's sometimes just called Alan Stewart, goes out there waving a pickaxe at them. Well, you're not supposed to do that, and led to his downfall in politics. Now, what do we know from the Gemini, or what do we suspect from the Gemini? A, his behavior was probably not primarily for ideological reasons, because Gemini usually entertains different points of view and does not usually rigidly focus on one view of the truth. So this is how you can use the astrology. It sounds like a political, excuse me, a political philosophy. He's angry at these people for contradicting his plan. He comes out there waving a pickaxe at them. That's probably not what happened. It could be, but I doubt it. This is how you can use the astrology, because that's not how Gemini works. It must have been some other sequence of events. Two, he may have been acting in a way that was rather silly, histrionic, and another theatrical and exaggerated way. It did lack dignity. Could have been out of proportion for the situation. Gemini does that. They're almost childish. They act in crazy, extreme ways, just like kids do, because they're not afraid to explore different things and open themselves up to different ways of experiencing life. So, now, you will find, I have in bold, that sometimes Gemini will forcefully defend a position or belief in a particular situation, but then at another time they'll almost contradict it. And this is why we call Gemini mutable. It does fit that mutable definition, because their curiosity leads them to different things. Now, so maybe he was just having a temporary little defense of his position. More likely, some sequence of events caused him to act in a rather dramatic way. But we know that Gemini is not usually going to be an entrenched belief system and defend it rigidly and consistently, as many politicians do. So the story is, from this website, independent.co.uk, I'll read this quickly. As Stewart inspected tree felling work with representatives from the contractors, Wimpy, so there's this company, Wimpy, that's taking down the trees to put down the road. Some protesters come up to him. He picked up the pickaxe, which was lying on the ground, and held it up. At the time, he insisted he acted in self-defense, and the police launched an investigation into an alleged assault against him. The military police insisted the demonstration... the MP, not military police, sorry. That's his title as I forget what MP means in Scotland, sorry. So anyway, it's similar to what we call in the United States senator or congressman. So Stewart insisted the demonstrators had rushed him. There was a pickaxe lying there, he said. I picked up the pickaxe, first of all, to avoid anybody else picking it up, and secondly, in possible self-defense. There was then a robust discussion. I felt scared. The situation was extremely unpleasant. But the demonstrators and Scottish Labour MPs questioned his version of events. Lindsay Keenan, a member of the environmental group Earth First, who witnessed the incident, claimed Stewart had waved the pickaxe and that he had felt threatened. So no doubt, conclusion, no doubt the demonstrators approached Stewart directly and forcefully, but probably not in a physically threatening way. However, Gemini can surprise you in creative ways that you do not expect, and Stewart was not going to take what he may have perceived as verbal abuse and aggressiveness lightly, and he overreacted. So the situation is, the demonstrators are upset, they approach him. Stewart, being a politician, is supposed to just take this in a dignified way. He sees this pickaxe, and he responds in a dramatic kind of way, and says, I've got a surprise for you. And Gemini often comes up with surprising, creative responses to situations that are a little bit out of character from what we expect, just like children. That's what happened. And that's how it evolved. It's not like he planned this and said, oh, they're going against my, my goals, and I'm angry about it, and I'm going to go fight them. It's not a planned, ideologically based response, because that's not how Gemini operates. So from the astrology, we know, or we don't know, but we're fairly certain of the kind of scenario that would lead to this, and it's exactly what we expect. Okay, so, and by the way, 2 years after this pickaxe waving incident, Stewart had a nervous breakdown. So note that Gemini is not incapable of emotional depression and sadness, passion and anxiety. Sometimes we think of Gemini as being so light and so much like a butterfly. They're not going to get emotionally depressed and have breakdowns. No, they can. And it's not just that there are other things in the chart. Gemini is curious, but contrary to some descriptions of Gemini, it is not so light, breezy, and indifferent to circumstances that it can be free of the issues. Gemini can get very troubled, very depressed, just like any other sign, and it gets frustrated under the pressures of adult life to have to perform, to be criticized, and not to enjoy the process of exploring and understanding what's going on. I mentioned Richard Monette struggled with acute stage fright, and we have a murderer and rapist. So Gemini can go to extremes. It just wants to enjoy learning about life, experiencing different things about life, but it can get just as frustrated and depressed as any other zodiac sign. So that's something to be aware of with Gemini. And so we're learning a lot from our extreme case sampling research, what a zodiac sign can and cannot do. By the way, another quote about John Allen Stewart, it was that he was a pleasant personality. A pleasant personality hides an extremely sharp brain. A first in economics at St. Andrews University, no less, Stewart fell foul of the drink problem. So he had a drinking problem, alcoholic tendency, but he was brilliant academically, and from being first in economics at St. Andrews went on to Harvard. And if we look at his aspect patterns, we would find that he has Mercury conjunct Mars Uranus in his chart. I've got a typo here, pattern. It's a 14th harmonic pattern. When I saw this, I was looking at his chart. I figured he must be likely to be advanced at an academic level, and then I read that he was, with his exceptional academic performance at St. Andrews and then going on to Harvard University. So the talent, the behavior is often more in the aspect patterns, and the style is in the signs. And as often happens with Gemini, the pressures of adult life are often too much for Gemini. That's an important key issue that's often overlooked with Gemini, that all of these pressures to perform, to put up with nonsense becomes too much. It was too much for him, and he just had a breakdown. He overreacted. This is actually common for Gemini. It's not just light and like a social butterfly. It really gets stressed by a life that's so fixated on things so removed from what's really important, that we enjoy life, we explore, we learn, we discuss things, rather than being verbally abused and attacked. It's way out of line from what makes any sense to the soul of Gemini. So at a deep, visceral level, it's not reasonable. It's not acceptable that life has to be all this pressure and forcefulness, and it often causes Gemini to unravel. And we see the unraveling with Patrice Allegre, so showing again how Gemini can go to extremes. We have this idea that Scorpio is the intense one, and Gemini and Libra are the light ones. Not so true. Here we see a madman, a very evil person, raping and murdering women. Extreme Gemini chart. Now, he had a very troubled childhood. He hated his father. His mother was an alcoholic. He was very, clearly he was extremely frustrated sexually. He vented his anger and hostility in a manner that demonstrated no compassion or empathy for the women he tortured and killed. And there's his chart. Mercury rising in Gemini, Sun, Venus, and Mars all in Gemini, and yet he's a brutal person. So we have to throw out this idea that Gemini is going to prevent us from being brutal. And there's, it's hard to see where the brutality would come from. He's got Uranus, square this Sun, Mercury, Venus. That's not necessarily, the square to Mars is a little weaker, 4 degrees. So, if you allow very large orbs and consider that to be strong, maybe that would help explain it. But what is the Gemini? It won't prevent you from going to extremes. And sometimes diabolical and evil extremes, as in this case. So just to give you an idea about who Patrice Allegre was, he was charged for the rape and murder of 6 young women between 1989 and 1997, plus 1 rape, 1 attempted killing. He could have killed 15 more people, perhaps men as well as women. He was said to be a teenager with problems. He'd been in prison and detention centers. He has a daughter born in 1989, and here's a list of the victims. This is all from a website. He knew all his victims. They were neighbors, women he met in the club where he was working, or sometimes a friend of a friend. He would kill when he was drunk. He wanted to have sex with the women. They refused. He beat them, tied their hands, raped them, and strangled them. Very unpleasant to think about. But if astrology could help us understand this and and give us some insight, maybe it could provide a sense of where the therapy is and what we need to do to prevent these things from happening. So, again, Gemini is not so cerebral, light, and mutable that it prevents a person from having so much emotional intensity and emotional dysfunction to prevent this extreme behavior. Very important to know this, because so often we see a lot of Gemini in the chart and we just assume the person's light and breezy. Not always true. So what is this Gemini? What is it telling us? It's not telling us that he would be such an evil person, but let me start reading from here. He is believed to have arranged wild parties and orgies. We have to assume that he enjoyed seeing who would come to the parties, how the party would develop, and meeting the various people. So these crazy orgies. This is a perfect Gemini experience. All these different, strange, curious people showing up, all the surprises. So the parties were no doubt fascinating and interesting to him as he interacts with many unusual and probably even bizarre people. And why did he become so malicious and evil? Why did he have no compassion and empathy? I think that this is in these vibrational patterns. Here's an 11th harmonic pattern with Mars, Jupiter, and Uranus showing low impulse control. The high sexuality, Pluto opposite Venus in the 11th harmonic chart, and opposite the Sun. So we, I think that a lot of the qualities of the person are in the patterns. In the 66th harmonic chart, we see the pattern stronger. I'm not expecting you to understand all this harmonics right now, but I just want to give you an idea that I do think that there are astrological things, these vibrational patterns that indicate the drives and motivations of the person. Interestingly, the 9th harmonic, which is a harmonic that gives compassion, he has very little going on. One of the few things he has going on is a Saturn trine Pluto, which probably doesn't help very much. So this could be an area for research in the future, that people who lack empathy and compassion and don't bond, in addition to having abusive childhoods, perhaps have very weak things going on in the 9th harmonic that prevent them from developing the ability to bond and have the normal sense of compassion and respect for people that we need to have to be healthy. So the breakdown of bonding, the low impulse control, and what does the Gemini do? It doesn't really weaken any of that. It just makes him a Gemini character. So he has these wild, crazy parties. And when his frustrations build up, when he's drunk, his evil, frustrated side comes out. So he does have a Gemini style, a Gemini attitude of being curious about things, of playing with things. It does not prevent him from being the evil person that he became. And this is more harmonic analysis. Sometimes we go up to the 27th harmonic, and there's not much going on here either. So no strong indications using vibrational astrology that help him develop the kinds of normal bonding. And that's what I say here in this slide. His negative personality, probably disinclined women to have sex with him, right? I mean, the guy's a nutcase. Women are not going to want to have sex with him. The few aspects in the 9th and 27th harmonic made it more difficult for him to develop the normal kinds of respect, empathy, and compassion for others, and it all builds up into this evil behavior, very destructive behavior. Now, so, what I'm saying here is that the Gemini is just the way the person does whatever they do. He does have a Gemini lifestyle of exploring and experiencing things. It happens to be in the most evil and diabolical way. All right, let's look at our fourth of the 9 people, Ina Stanley, an astrologer. I know Ina, she's very clever, she has a great sense of humor, a youthful attitude, a light, pleasant laugh. She's curious, takes an interest in many different people and kinds of astrology. Her school of astrology, she has an online school of astrology, supports different kinds of astrology. She finds it all very interesting. Life is fun. She doesn't get stuck in one mold. She stays youthful and keeps exploring. Mercury rising in Gemini. Sun, Venus, and Mars also in Gemini. Notice, by the way, Sun and Mars opposite Jupiter. Very ambitious person, very much a go-getter, worked very hard to make her school of astrology become successful, and eventually it did. Okay, so that's all I have to say about Ina, that she has that Gemini relationship to the world. That we enjoy this. We don't get dragged down. And I know Ina went through some struggles, as many people do, and the struggles to meet financial obligations or to perform, they bear very heavily on Gemini. They're not so light and free that they want to be light and free so that they can enjoy life. But when the economic pressures build up or other pressures build up, it can be very difficult for Gemini. We're going to see this with a few other people, with our 2 athletes in a minute. Here's Vance Packard, journalist, social critic, author. Very obvious Gemini life. In his book, The Hidden Persuaders, first published in 1957, Packard explores the use of consumer motivational research and other psychological techniques, including depth psychology and subliminal tactics, by advertisers to manipulate expectations and induce desire for products. The Gemini traits are clear. How does this work? What's really going on? Exploring all these things, and here's this chart with all the Gemini and the Gemini rising. So the Gemini relationship to the world is very obvious. Richard Monette, the actor, he's a Canadian actor and director, best known for his 14-season tenure as the longest-serving artistic director of the Stratford Festival of Canada from 1994 to 2007. Monette fought a lifelong battle with stage fright and gradually refocused his energies from acting to directing. The Gemini stellium in the 5th house, traditionally, according to astrology, is great for acting. Why the stage fright? I've already talked about this. You might say it's a Sun-Saturn conjunction. He's got a Sun very tight, a little over 1 degree Sun-Saturn conjunction, which makes a person self-critical, demanding of themselves, makes them a perfectionist. But not all Sun-Saturn are inclined to have self-doubt and inclined to concern about criticism. But the need to deliver an honest and sincere service in a responsible way inclines to put high demands on oneself that are difficult to reach. So he's demanding of himself, and I've already talked about how the Gemini wants to enjoy the discovery, be fascinated by the complex, beautiful world we're in, and this pressure to perform and meet the expectations can really be intensely difficult for Gemini. The social obsession with competition based on skill and flawless execution just becomes too much. And the stage fright, I think, is related to the Sun Saturn, the pressure on himself that he does want to perform well, but this visceral sense, this deep sense that life shouldn't be all about how good you are, how good you are, how good you are. So it just rubs Gemini the wrong way, and it can unravel very often. So we'll see this over and over again. The social pressures can cause the Gemini energy to just go into depression, even alcoholism, stage fright. Gemini needs to free itself from these burdens. They're not constructive. They're not useful. They're not fundamental to what life should be about. It should be about enjoying the theater, exploring, doing the best you can. And if there's an error, there's an error. It's not the end of the world. That needs to be what happens. But the real world often demands more of us. So Bert Hanstra, clear, strong Gemini lifestyle, Dutch film director of films and documentaries. His documentary Glass won the Academy Award for documentary short subject. His feature film Fanfare was the most visited Dutch film of all time. His documentaries express the Gemini qualities. We learn about various topics. We are presented with information that arouses our curiosity. So he's in the zone, Hanstra. He's in tune with his Gemini. He's curious. He's making us curious. He's found a way in the adult world to be Gemini. Congratulations, Bert Hanstra. This is the challenge of Gemini. If you can make a life where you can be curious and share that curiosity, you're going to have a fulfilling life. And he was able to do it. We're going to see with the two athletes, just like with the actor Richard Monette, these pressures of the adult life created some problems at certain points. So we have two athletes, Jeff Bagwell and Steffi Graf. They made money as adults doing what children do, for playing. And if you think about what it's like to be an athletic child in the second paragraph, the athletic child has many experiences less athletic children are not likely to experience. As a child athlete, you're going to go to the next town, the next village, later on to the next state or province. You're going to travel around. You're going to meet different people. You're going to be at these competitions. You're going to be interacting with other people your age, with adults who are your coaches you become friends with. It's very Gemini opportunities. It's curious. It's fun. It's interesting. You're not stuck in doing one thing all the time. You have this variety. But then what happens if you become very skilled and it becomes competitive? Then the sport, the fun, turns into a grind, turns into a competition, turns into such an emphasis on every mistake you make. And this is the undoing of Gemini, over and over and over again. Gemini needs to find a life where they can be expressive, explore and have fun, and not get burdened down. And once you become a superstar athlete, the pressure typically begins. Bagwell abuses alcohol after his career. He states that the demands of sports plus the demands of family are too much to handle. He's aware of it. Gemini's just not made to deal with all this stuff. Rather than seeing this as a weakness or a limitation of Gemini, we can see this as a reasonable and intelligent attribute of Gemini to ensure that life is interesting and not to allow ourselves to become overwhelmed by stress. That's what Gemini has to do. Get out of the stress and enjoy it. They must make that decision. Bagwell made the decision not to take these opportunities to be a coach, a batting coach, coach for the team in various capacities, because it sounds like it's light. Bagwell at one point states, you don't realize the pressure involved in just being a coach. The long hours that you put in, never-ending emphasis on it. That's not what Gemini is made to do. The family is more important. He made the right decision. People complained about Bagwell. He just disappeared. He went off the map. Where is he? he was a superstar, and then after he finishes his career, we never hear from him again. A lot of superstars become announcers or coaches or participate in some way. Well, he made the right decision to not put himself under all that pressure. And Steffi Graf, similar. She's devoted herself. She hasn't become depressed, but she's devoted herself to marriage, her children, to her charities. She has not encouraged her children to become tennis stars and live that life of pressure and stress. So there's a chart of Jeff Bagwell. There's all this Gemini in the 9th house, double Gemini, and Mercury in Gemini, huge amount of Gemini. Again, well, actually, it's all 5 inner planets in Gemini. How is he Gemini? What's the incredibly strong Gemini? He's not a writer. He's not a light social butterfly. He's not talkative. And Steffi Graf also was especially known for not being talkative. But it's that desire to just enjoy the curiosities of life, enjoy the sport, explore things. And when the pressures become too intense, Gemini cracks. And Jeff Bagwell really cracked under that pressure. And here's some information about Bagwell. And as you study the biography, you'll see the strong Gemini themes, playing different sports. He was a fantastic player, rated by statistician Bill James as the 4th best first baseman of all time. And by the way, where is the baseball? We'll see it in the vibrational patterns. I'll be making tutorial videos on athletes and the vibrational patterns in their chart, and we'll be looking at Jeff Bagwell's chart in future videos that show where baseball talent comes from. Signs won't give talent. They'll just give the style that you do whatever you do. And here's the complaints about him sort of disappearing from different people. Excuse me. He became private and withdrawn. We don't think of, why would Gemini be private and withdrawn? It does not fit our standard idea of Gemini. But with this understanding of Gemini, we know why Gemini will become private and withdrawn. Because of pressure. It wants to get out of the pressure. So again, we see that the specific behavior is very difficult to predict based on zodiac signs. It is easier to predict behavior from using vibrational astrology patterns. So do not get pulled into the tendency to predict behavior based on zodiac signs. If you're an astrologer or a student of astrology and you see a lot of Gemini, don't automatically assume the person's going to be a writer, talk real fast, etc. I believe that's in the aspect patterns, and the Gemini will just show you what his lifestyle is fulfilling. The lifestyle where they can explore things, pursue their curiosity, not be under the pressures of making money and being perfect. That's the key. That will cause the Gemini energy to unravel, become depressed or dysfunctional. We see it over and over and over again with every single one of these people with the intense Gemini. The zodiac signs are more psychological than behavioral. Very important point. And why do I claim these things? It's an evidence-based system. We've got to find ideas that fit all of these extreme Gemini people. So here's some more information about Bagwell. If you want, you can stop, pause this video and read all this if you want to. But the bottom paragraph here, again, the personal stress in Bagwell's life is emphasized. It's a big deal. We don't think about Gemini with stress, but Gemini becomes very stressed by these pressures of the adult life and needs to get out of it. Do what Bert Honstra did. He made a successful career following curiosity and inspiring curiosity in the rest of us. So Bagwell was right to go into hiding. Even though his fans don't like it, it's the right thing to do. I support him in that. And have fun with your kids, is what I would advise him to do. Life is interesting, and don't let all those pressures, cause you to lose your right path for you. And here's Steffi Graf one of the greatest tennis players of all time, triple Gemini with the planets in the 12th house. And other tutorial videos I talk about how she's a quiet and humble person. And if you think it's her 12th house that causes her to be not a chatterbox and not light, then we have to use that idea consistently. We need to develop rules that we use consistently. And if we think the 12th house is that powerful, then we should always look into that. As soon as somebody says, oh, I have a stellium in Virgo or Libra or Scorpio, whatever it is, that maybe the 12th house is going to totally change those, especially something like Sagittarius, which is supposed to be outgoing. We need to use consistent rules to understand these things. And one of the ways that I've come up with consistent rules is I've reinterpreted the signs, putting less emphasis on behavior and a set of characteristics and more as a psychological process, a way that we relate to the world. And with it, I'm able to consult people, I'm able to look at people and understand what's going to work for them and what's not going to work for them. Okay, so this last paragraph, again, you can pause this video if you want to and read all this. I'm just repeating some of the same concepts that I've mentioned before about how zodiac signs work and what they mean in the life of Steffi Graf. Well, that's it, my friends. This is over a 15-minute video. It's a long video, but I think it's worth the time because zodiac signs play such a powerful point in astrology. I believe, using this more evidence-based approach, that a lot of what we assume is true about zodiac signs is simply not true. And we're going, if we're professional astrologers or in whatever capacity we're using astrology, I think if we have a more realistic, honest, and accurate idea of what these things mean, what the aspects, the signs, the houses mean, we're just going to do a much, much better job. So it's worth looking at this, thinking about it seriously, and realizing that a lot of the things we say about zodiac signs are just not true, but there is something valuable, very valuable, in understanding this, and we can help guide people to a lifestyle that will work for them. And again, the zodiac sign is telling us a way that people relate to the world, but not what they do. It tells us how they do what they do and what is going to be satisfying for them. And the bottom line for Gemini is follow that curiosity. I think the Bert Honstra is a good image of how Gemini can work successfully. Okay, my friends, thank you very much for listening. God bless. Namaste.